All right, well, welcome to PSL Demo Day. Today, we're glad to have Anderson Frailey from the University of Virginia here. Anderson is a significant contributor to the PSL community. He maintains several models, tax data, TaxBrain, and tax calculator. He's here today with us to talk about how to use the Python API for the TaxBrain application in order to do tax policy analysis. Anderson.
All right, thanks for that introduction. And let me just share my screen real quick. Okay, so y'all should see a just Jupyter notebook here. So before I get going, just a quick summary of what TaxBrain is and what it does. So TaxBrain, like Jason said, well, there's kind of two ways to use it. You can use it as a web app that I presented here before, or you can use it as a standalone Python API, which is what I'll be demonstrating today. So it was originally made with the web app primarily at the front of mind because you needed a just new interface for the TaxBrain web app. But while we were making that, I decided to make it usable as a Python API as well. So what I'm going to demonstrate today is just some of the capabilities of that API and some of the new features that I'm working on, specifically a stacked reform provision that Jason actually helped a lot with. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into it. So just this cell right here is just defining all the reforms we're going to do. I took this straight from Jason and his reform notebook for the Biden proposal. And we're just going to work off of this for today. So here are just a few of the functions that we're going to need to import from TaxBrain. So we'll have the TaxBrain object itself, which is sort of the main interface that we'll have to work with. And that's where we'll define like what years we want to run it for. That's where we'll define the reform, the data, and all of that. This report function just generates a nice PDF report of what our reform tells us. And that's been updated a little recently just to be a little nicer and easier to read. So I'll show that at the end. And then a bunch of just utility functions for plotting and creating tables that we'll also use. And that's just, again, just for sharing the final results. But if we get that going. So TaxBrain itself can be used to run static or dynamic reform. So if you wanted to provide some kind of behavioral provisions to it, like you would the behavioral response package, it has that capability. Or if you just wanted to run statically, it will just run everything using the tax calculator Python package, which is also part of the PSL library. And recently, and like I said earlier, I've been adding the stack reform provision, so that's what we're going to actually focus on today. But the documentation on the TaxBrain, that can be found on the TaxBrain GitHub page and GitHub pages, shows you how to do the static and behavioral reforms as well. But just to get started, so it's really easy to get this going, to create a TaxBrain object. So all you need to specify is your start year, your end year, your reform, what data you want to use. So I'm going to start with 2021. That's the first year that these reform provisions would be going into effect. And we'll say the end year is 2030. So we're doing the full budget window. Basically, our reform will be this dictionary of reforms, actually, because we're going to do the stack provision. And we do need to specify that our reform that we're feeding into TaxBrain is stacked. And then finally, we want to you're just going to use the CPS here instead of the puff file. So once you've done that, what TaxBrain is doing right now is just creating all of those objects, or not, it's not really creating them yet, but it's sort of testing your reform, making sure it's a valid reform for tax calculator, making sure all the years line up well, and just sort of getting everything ready to go. What's nice about TaxBrain is it really abstracts away from needing to really work with all the smaller objects within tax calculator, like the policy object and the records objects. So that all you need to do is give it just your form and what years you want to run, and then you can just let it go. So to actually run it, you just use the run method, And so what's happening now is it's going through, TaxBrain is creating all those objects like the policy object and the records objects for tax calculator and plugging in your forms. So it's going to create a base calculator for just your baseline to compare it to. And in this case, it's going to go through and run the calculator for all of our specified reforms as well. If you had also specified, say, some behavioral parameters, like you wanted to change some elasticities, then it would also take care of that by plugging in all your behavioral parameters into the behavioral responses package and running it as well. And just while it's running, what it's doing is it's also saving the data as you go along for every year. So it has some default variables that it saves, like combined tax liability, total AGI, expanded income, the weight for every record, et cetera. So it'll save that for every year so that you can go through later and look through the data. And also so you can use some of these sort of support functions that I mentioned before. And so right now, for example, it might take a little while because we're doing the stack reform, but it's basically running tax calculator for every year from 2021 to 2030. It's running the baseline first, and then it's going through and iterating through all these provisions and sort of tacking them on to create this final calculator. Yeah, so like I said, it takes a little while just to run. I haven't really optimized this new stacked run functions yet, just because I kind of only finished working on them this weekend. But by the time I open up a pull request for it, it should be a little more optimized than they are now.
Anderson,
in the meantime, while it's running, do you have any sort of immediate questions?
Yeah, this is Jason. I just want to clarify. So when you said there's a baseline, so this is interacting with tax calculator. So it's using the baseline in tax calculator, which is a current law baseline. Is that right?
Yes, exactly. Okay. And you actually can, somewhat new features, you can provide a separate baseline policy if you wanted to. So if, say, you wanted to go back to pre-TCJA tax law, but then compare the Biden reform to that, you could provide like a JSON file that would revert tax calc to pre-TCJA, and then that would be your new baseline. So you can provide different baselines, but by default, everything is just like current law in the tax calculator.
Okay, great.
Can I ask a question? I mean, this is Rick Evans. You didn't say how to add that new baseline, but if I were just kind of trying to pull something together really quickly, it seems like I could just put whatever the new baseline is the first reform, and then just go off of that, right? I'm sure there's a nicer, cleaner way to do the new baseline, but it seems like if I just put a new baseline as the first reform, I could just build forward off of that, right?
Yeah, so if you were using the stacked provision, you definitely could. Let me show you all the arguments that TaxBrain takes, and you'll see like how you actually implement that new baseline. So here are all the parameters. So you start year, end year. If you're going to use like the puff, this is where you just specify your path to your data. And the important one here is this base policy. So if you wanted to just run, say, a static reform or behavioral form that you didn't do a stacked analysis for, you could just feed into this base policy parameter your reform JSON or your reform dictionary, as long as it's a valid tax calculator reform. Then it would work just fine. So you wouldn't have to do anything else. You would just specify that baseline parameter with whatever your new policy is, your base policy. Okay, so it is finished running. So we can show some of the outputs. I think one of the things that I'm going to update next with TaxBrain is how you actually do create some of the outputs, just because right now it's a little bit of a mix where there are some tables that are built into the TaxBrain object and some tables or some graphs that are like part of the TaxBrain utilities. And it can just be a little, like you can kind of forget which one goes where. So I think in the future, I might add like a TaxBrain results class that sort of wraps all that up into one, or just make the plots methods of the TaxBrain object as well. But if you do the TaxBrain distribution table, so the arguments that this one is going to take, like I said, the data gets saved for every single year that you run it. So for the distribution table, you can tell it what year you want the distribution to be for. You can tell it how you want it grouped. So by like weighted decile, standard income bins, or AGI bin. And you can also tell it what kind of income you want to use. So either expanded income or expanded income baseline. So the difference between those being, so expanded income and tax calculator includes things like a UBI, but that's not going to be, unless you specify your baseline policy as having a UBI, that won't be included in the baseline expanded income. So you can look at expanded income either before your policy, your reform provisions, or after, or afterwards. And then you also need to specify what calculator you're going to use. So like, do you want it to be your base or your form? Just because those will now be different. But if we just look at what this looks like, we'll do this for, let's say 2025. The group by will be weighted deciles, income measure, whoops. Will equal, and we'll use the reform calculator. So it's just going to make a nice data frame. Well, maybe not nice, but a data frame with all the information. And this is like the tables that you get on TaxBrain, the web application. So you can see it's broken down by income bin. It has how many people are in the bins, total AGI, how many people take the standard deduction, the total standard deduction. So it's a little more raw than the output you're going to get from the TaxBrain web app, just because we don't have all the columns renamed. We usually do it after the fact. But that's one option for your output. The others, we have some nice new plots as well that we've used, and also just some extra tables as well. So like one is like a weighted table or a weighted totals, where you can say, I need the weighted sum of combined tax liability, and I want to include the total, and it'll give you the weighted sum of the whatever variable you provided for your baseline, your form, and the difference between the two, as well as a total column just all across the budget window. If you wanted multi-year or multiple variables, you can do that as well. You can just provide a short list. So if you wanted income tax and the combined tax liability, here again, we need to specify what calculator we want to use, so your form or your baseline. Unlike the weighted totals, just because we're using multiple, so every row is going to now be a variable instead of every row being the baseline or the reform. And then let's include the total again. So just provide nice summary, pretty high level, nothing too special, I guess, but it just makes it really easy to do it. And then there's one more. There's the differences table in tax calculator. So again, you just need to provide it with what year you want to use. So we'll say 2029, how you want your tax units to be grouped, so weighted deciles, and also what tax you want to do the difference of, and it'll tell you, based on what income percentile you're in, how many people are in that percentile again, what percent received a tax, or how many received a tax cut, what percent received a tax cut, how many received a tax increase, your average taxes, the total change, sort of the share of the change, and a few other just general groups, or how general differences between the groups, like in benefits. So we didn't change the benefits or assign a UBI, so that's all 0. But then you can see the percentage change in after-tax income as well.
Anderson, a quick question on this table. So I've seen two tables with the weighted deciles, and most of them I think make sense to me. What's the difference between the 0 through 10N versus 0 through 10Z and 0 through 10P? So the first three rows here, what are those describing?
Yeah, so that's a little weird. So that's describing people in like the 0 to 10 who have like negative income. I think negative income, but are in that 0 to 10 percentile. 0 to 10th percentile, but with positive income, and then 0 to 10th with zero income. Yeah, it just kind of gets really granular in that decile. So we break down that decile, and then we break down the very top one into the 90 to 95th, 90 to 99th to the top 1% as well. And that's actually a feature of Tax Calculator that we're taking advantage of here.
Okay. Yeah, that's helpful to break up the negatives. Yeah.
Yeah, that split is so the percent after tax income is comprehensible, at least for the positive, because the sign can get flipped in the negative, right?
Right. Then a few more plots that we have, and this is again kind of gets into where I don't really like how I've done this for TaxBrain right now, how we have the plots in a separate utility function, but the tables is part of the TaxBrain object. But we do have some. So like I like this volcano plot, and this was inspired by the New York Times piece a couple of years ago that covered the TCJA. So I'll show you what it looks like in a second, but all you need to do is feed this function your TaxBrain object, what year you want to run it for. So I'll do the last year, the budget 2030. What you want your Y variable to be here. So that defaults to expanded income. Actually, I'm not, yeah. What you want your X variable, and this all makes sense in a second. That defaults to your combined tax liability. And also you can provide like a range of your values. And again, that'll make a little more sense in a second here. So we'll do like the minimum Y and max Y. We'll make that 100K. So this will just give you a little, I forgot Matlab that does that. It's sort of like, so every dot on this graph is representing a tax unit. So it plots their expanded income, where they fall in that distribution, and where how they're changed in tax liability. So, you have here at the bottom people with not a lot of expanded income, and you can see under this reform, they don't see a very large increase in tax liability. You can see there are some who are a little higher in the income distribution, and they're receiving a tax cut. That's this little teal area, and over to the right with the sort of magenta, these are all the people with a tax increase. So again, every dot is a tax unit in this case, and I just think it's a kind of cool plot to see how different people on the income spectrums have their tax liability changed. I'll do a couple more, and then I want to show the reports as well.
Anderson, I have a quick question. This is Peter.
Yep.
Are those plots on the web app too, or is this just through the Python?
So this is just through the Python API for now. They will get included in the web app when I get a little more time to sort of update that. But for now, just the Python API.
Very nice.
I have a question too, Anderson. Can this be changed in after-tax income rather than tax liability as well?
Yeah. So both these X and Y variables you can pick.
Cool.
And it'll work with whatever you would like there.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm. So one more.
Also,
again,
can you download that as a PNG?
Yeah, you can save this. So this is just like a general matplotlib figure that it returns. So you can save it and do whatever else you'd like from there.
Got it.
And then I'll do this graph or this one last plot, and then I'll get into the automated reports as well. So this is just a distribution plot, and you give it a year, so like 2025. And it shows you, and this is in the automated reports, but it'll show you like the change in after-tax income, again, by expanded income bin, and sort of like what percentage of the bin saw an increase or a decrease or a pretty insignificant change themselves. So there's just a couple of the plots. There are a few more, but we're sort of running low on time, so I will skip those and just jump on the reports. So the automated reports are something that are available on the web app. They are in sort of like just those download folders. But what it does is it takes your TaxBrain object and it takes all the results from your reforms that you're running, and it just puts together a nice short PDF, sort of with a high level summary of what you've done. So for the report, you get the TaxBrain object. We'll name it Biden proposal. I don't remember how to spell proposal, but that'll work. Your output directory, you specify, so we'll call that just Biden. And you can specify an author as well. So we'll just say it's me. And what that'll do is it'll take your dictionary, take a lot of these tables that I've shown already, take some of these graphs that I've shown, and just stitch it all together into a little PDF output that you can go and share with people. Or, you know, for example, if you were like a congressional staffer, you can just, you know, print this off, send it to your boss. That's sort of a relevant output, but we go up and we open this PDF. Take a second. Let's see, it might not be working. Okay, so that is just going to take a little while to load. I'm just going to share a different part of my screen. And okay, so this is the PDF itself. So just a quick overview of what it does. It just summarizes the change that you made, notes any like notable changes in certain tax variables. You get the aggregates and distributional and a nice summary of your policy changes. So this, for example, just writes up that it's a summary of the fiscal impact of modifying a number of areas of tax code, including refundable credits, itemized deductions, and capital gains. Gives you the baseline as just current law as of today. Tells you what the budget window is, tells you what the overall change to tax liability is, and also specifies, you know, who can see the most. So in this case, the people making over $1 million see the largest change in tax liability, and they can typically see on average their tax liability increase by about $141,000. A few notable changes in 2025, it tells you itemized deductions increase and the number of A&T filers increases. It gives you this total change in tax liability between the baseline and the reform, breaks it down into your income tax, payroll tax, and combined taxes as well over the whole budget. So you can see where those changes are coming from. Gives you a nice graph. Gives you that distribution table, but made a little bit nicer. So you can see, so we've got, you know, just renamed the columns and dropped a few. And this is the new part, because we did it as a stacked estimate, it will also break this down for each provision. So you can see like the rate cuts, the QIBID change, the applying the payroll taxes. I'm not sure what happened to this line. I'll need to look into that. But this is sort of just a stacked table that it'll give you as part of the report. And also it's got this summary of what Jason asked about, what those 0 to 10N, 0 to 10Z, and 0 to 10B bins are. Creates that change in the table again, and gives you a quick summary of every policy that changed per year. So I think that's out of order. I think it just got moved because of the size of the table. But you got to see in 2021 all the provisions that went into effect, the original value and the new value. It's the whole list, kind of breaks it up by year. So most of these provisions came in during 2021. Tells you the baseline. So if you had specified a different baseline, this would be changed, and it would just tell you what the changes were in that baseline. And if you had specified any behavioral assumptions or consumption assumptions or growth assumptions that can be used with tax calculator, it would list those as well. And it also tell you what versions of the packages we used. So TaxBrain says 0.0 because this is just my branch fork of it, because I haven't actually pushed some of these changes up yet and merged them into a new release. But usually in the latest tax calculator, I'm not sure why this is listed as 0.0, but yeah. So that's really all the main parts that I wanted to show. I think some of the next steps for TaxBrain that I want to make is, like I said, maybe creating like a TaxBrain results output so that all of the plots and tables are all just combined into one. I really want to have a function that helps you find like the like a budget neutral value for a budget neutral value for like a specified forms. Like when we wrote the budget neutral UBI paper a few years ago, we were able to just iterate over different UBI values until we found the budget neutral value. So I'd like to implement something like that that lets you specify that you want to iterate over this certain variable until you get to the budget neutral level. Yeah, I think continuing to kind of work on these reports, make them a little more robust, make sure all the tables stay in order, stuff like that. But yeah, I think this is just about all I wanted to show. I'm happy to take any questions now.
Anderson, this was really impressive, and there's a lot of kudos in the chat for this report, especially a really nice summary of the output in terms of what are the results and what were the inputs, the parameters that changed. That's really cool object that you can pull out of this quite easily. I did have a question. So if somebody's interested in this, and I think after watching you demonstrate it, they probably are, how do they get that TaxBrain package?
So sorry for some of the background noise. My neighbors are mowing at the moment, but so this is all available on Conda Forge. You can install it, just Conda install --c Conda Forge TaxBrain. You can also just download it from GitHub. You just kind of fork it for some of the features that haven't made it to the TaxBrain package yet, like the stacked form. I'll be opening up a PR for that later today. So yeah, so either Conda Forge or GitHub right now.
Great. And what about if somebody was interested in having a little more kind of information about how to run like an example or something like that? Do you have that available?
Yeah. So we have some documentation on the GitHub page. Sorry. Let me see. I'm trying to pull it up real quick. That will show you how to do it. Oh, that's down. So it looks like the Jupyter book, the link is broken right now, but I will fix. Oh, here we go. Let me share this. Yeah, so this is a Jupyter book with some of the explanations. So it'll go over and tell you how to use it, what the parameters are. Again, this doesn't reflect the stacked form yet, but this is what you can look at, and I'll share a link to it in the chat as well. So it tells you how to run it, what the arguments are, what this run function does, how to access some of the data, and all of that. So it shows you for a static reform as well, and some of the tables and graphs. Or you can use the web application for it. I did a demo of that earlier last year, or yeah, I guess it was last year. If you don't want to code, so there's a link to the web app on Compute Studio as well. I'm not going to try to cite it right now, but yeah, so you can either use it. So you can check the documentation; it'll tell you how to use both the Python API as well as the web app.
Hey, Anderson, is there anything we can do to help you get the changes that you've been showing us into the master branch of TaxBrain? Is there any testing or review or contributions we can make to help out?
So review would definitely be nice. Like I said, I'm going to get this new PR with the staff reform up today. So any review of that would be useful. I don't think it's quite ready. I think it can be sort of optimized a little more to run faster. But yeah, review mostly. I think this staff reform is probably the last thing I'm going to add before the next release of TaxBrain. So yeah, any review would be really helpful in sort of making sure it still sort of makes sense how to use it with the interface.
Anderson, this is Rick Evans. I'm just like, my foot is thumping on the ground with the ability to just run a stacked reform and have it automatically generate into a PDF report. Clearly it's all latexed up, and that's just going to be that report that automatically generates is going to be just such a beautiful functionality that I think that is one of the most compelling. It seems to me like that's going to drive the most people to using this model, is that you could go from data to report in just like 2 command lines. I had a question about, you said something about putting the tables functionality is part of TaxBrain or Tax Calculator, I forget which, but then the images functionality, the plotting functionality is separate. What's kind of your preferred setup there, and why?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I haven't really decided, because how I like that, I'm leaning towards something where you can sort of have the plots as part of the TaxBrain object, just so you don't have to think about, where do I import the volcano plot from? It's just attached to your object. The alternative is doing like what some of the like stats models do, where you run a regression and it gives you like a results object back with all your parameters and things. So I could create like a TaxBrain results object where that object has all of the plotting and tables functions, and like the report function, for example, all built into it. But I'm still sort of figuring it out. So any suggestions on like what would be easiest for users would definitely be welcome, and sort of what would be the most intuitive to other people.
Just my first intuition on this would be to have it just all be kind of sub methods of the tax calculator model. I mean, that's the place where it's going to be used. That's just my first thought. I don't know if that's right though. Yeah.
I think that makes more sense than moving it all to like the utilities.
All right, Anderson, thank you so much for presenting today. We were glad to see this. Yeah, excited to use it too.
Yeah, definitely. So, if you have any sort of suggestions or questions about it, you can just open up an issue on the GitHub page, and I'll be able to respond to it pretty quick. So